are for the interior region. And I'll just let Nanette pop in and do a quick introduction of herself, and then we'll carry on.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nanette Drobot, and I'm the Regional Director for the Interior Region. So Dana and I work closely together. Dana develops and I operationalize, if you think of it in those terms.
Thank you, Nanette. Hopefully that changed screens and everyone's on board. So again, thanks for today. We understand that we've been asked to come today to present and talk more about supportive housing in Grand Forks. We usually like to start though with starting about how we develop and work in communities to create housing. So this starts with community. We don't deliver any housing in any community unless it's a collaborative and consultative process with many partners. So these bubbles are showing 5, and often there can be even more bubbles, especially as you start building. There's developers and architects and planners and other communities and nonprofits. So it is a critical role for the community, local government, BC Housing, the Health Authority, social services agencies specific to supportive housing. And each group has a role to play in moving these projects forward. In the past, with respect to our homelessness reaction in Grand Forks, our solutions globally have been a bit more of what we refer to as reactive and last minute versus planning. And we have the resources and the support solutions here, the support solutions in this committee and in other aspects of your community. But we need to, I think, globally have a plan and support to move ahead. And I think we're hopeful that this is the starting point of that today. And we share your wish to not welcome another winter with people living outside. So we started this winter, we got Heart of You going, that was great. And we really appreciate the city's participation in getting that up and running, but it is a short-term solution. And so we'd like to move forward in a plan for the future. So as we're working on housing solutions, what are the roles for these organizations that we call them partnerships? And again, we list here 5, but there are, as projects move forward after the planning, there's even more resources that attend. So a community, one of the ideal things is to have a housing needs assessment done to guide the future planning and decision makers. This is often a great resource for local governments, for community groups, for the public in general, to understand the direction that Grand Forks wants to head as a community. I noticed on some of your minutes as I was looking at Chris that you'd seen the housing strategy that Kelowna had done, and we have other communities such as Salmon Arm and other ones that have these housing strategies. And then it's easy to reference for BC Housing, to reference to it, for your community groups to reference to it, for the council and mayor and council to reference to it when decisions are being made about potential housing opportunities coming into the community. And once we are presented with the community housing needs and housing strategies, then we're there to bring resources and determine the priority for some of those housing solutions, subject to potential housing programs that we have available. So sometimes we have to react to the housing program funding that's available, that then feeds into that plan. And then if another program comes along, how does that feed into the plan with the housing needs for that program as well? And once we have a proposal ready or an idea ready, then it goes, obviously, if there's determining locations and all those pieces, it goes through, there has to be the municipal review process that's required and critical to these projects moving forward. And typically there's also continued engagement with the community and with the neighbors that we like to see undertaken as well. It's important that the community does understand the different types of housing and how they can each build a stronger community. So today we will concentrate a little bit more on supportive housing, but it does go to speak about other housing options in your community as well as part of that plan: families, seniors, singles, and all those other aspects as well. And in the case of supportive housing, once we get a project approved and the building's underway, then a lot more of the operational planning comes in. And we'll talk a lot more about that later in the presentation than it will. But it's about how we select operators, and BC Housing works on that resident selection. We set up community advisory committees to work with the communities. The buildings are staffed 24/7. We have meal programs. and everything. And the supported housing specifically is independent housing. And again, we'll go into more details of that in the future or further into the presentation. And then also Interior Health does participate in these projects because they provide health services to the residents in their homes, which would be in a supportive housing project. So the 24/7 staffing we speak to is BC Housing funded, and then any clinical needs or additional outreaches by Interior Health or other social service agencies that provide those services to the residents. I'm going to pass over to Nanette to do the presentations. And Nanette, just tell me when you want me to
Thanks,
pass.
Dana. And thanks everybody for this invite. Dana and I have been doing a lot of presentations lately as it relates to housing needs in communities and just talking about homelessness in community and supportive housing and other housing programs. And it's been a really good opportunity, and we always welcome a chance to get together and build those relationships as we work towards housing solutions, especially in Grand Forks, where we've seen the acute need here for solutions. And so again, we appreciate all the work that you're doing, and we're happy to answer questions at the end of this. This slide is all around homelessness and how it's on the rise in the region. And of course, we know that the most immediate housing needs in a community are for those experiencing homelessness. And as I mentioned, homelessness is on the rise, not only in Grand Forks, but certainly across our region, and in fact, across the province and across the country. As we know, homelessness is an indicator of a number of things, that there are not enough affordable rentals in community. There's often some system failures. When we talk about who it is that are homeless, you will hear a variety of circumstances that relate to that individual getting to the place that they are. And if you've ever spoken to anybody who finds himself without a home, you will really experiencing that. You will really experience that. They are not a homogenous group. We often talk about how each one of us are a few paychecks away of having of not being without a home, and there's some very compelling factors that result in people not having homes, and it's heartbreaking, really. And we've produced a number of videos of our supportive housing, and they chronicle the lives of the people that had their journey to the supportive housing, and it's a tearjerker every single time, because you can relate in many ways to the situations that they face, and so it's when we can release these videos, we certainly will. And I think at the end there may even be a link to those videos on our website, so I really encourage you to review them. But just talking about some factors, it could be around poverty. It could be, as I said, a lack of affordable housing in community. It could be the impact of colonialization on Indigenous peoples. It could be they're in unsafe housing. There's violence in the house. It could be mental health and addiction issues that they face. And it could be also system failures. It could be, perhaps they're transitioning out of foster care, or there may be some barriers to accessing, our public systems. Next slide, please, Dana. So I was really filled with gratitude when Darren produced this information for us. There wasn't too many point-of-time counts that we were able to do this year due to COVID, and really happy for the collaboration of Boundary Family Services staff, as well as the Circle of Indigenous Nation staff, to develop this and to be able to report out on it. And it's very compelling in terms of the numbers, and it's what we've known for time. Now, keep in mind, these counts, of course, are just a snapshot of the current situation, and does not count things like people who are couch surfing, or anybody that may be hidden that a volunteer didn't get to for that particular count. But we can assume from these numbers and from talking to many of you that there are at least 36 people experiencing homelessness in Grand Forks, which is quite significant for your population, I would say. What's also interesting about these statistics is that 86% have lived in Grand Forks for 2 years or longer. 59% have been experiencing homelessness for over 1 year. And the other statistic that I thought was interesting was the age 50% are over the age of 46. 1/3 are Indigenous, which is similar to the counts that we've seen previously. It ranges anywhere between, I've seen 25 up to, I think there was 61% in the count that was done in 2018 for the city of West Kelowna and the West Bank First Nation. Next slide, please. So this next slide is just around our different housing programs that we have. I'm sure many of you are very familiar with maybe some or most of all of these programs. Building BC is our current sort of umbrella term for the programs that we have, and those programs are really looking to provide housing with support services, generally social services or social housing, sorry, and also just in general trying to address homelessness. Then we have sort of the supplement program, the rental assistance program, which is sort of divided into the SAFER program. For those of you who know about those are good for people who are over the age of 60, and there's a few other eligibility criteria attached to that. And then we have a rental assistance program for families. And again, there's eligibility around that, but really it's trying to get people to give them a bit of help as they live in the private market. And that's great when you have private market rentals. We're always facing that whole supply side of things where there isn't enough. And then on the right-hand side of this slide is the affordable rental and home ownership program. So really looking at this side of housing where we're targeting low to moderate income folks, the missing middle, as some people have called it, and again, working with our partners around affordable home ownership, which is an interesting program. We did one as a pilot some years ago. Dana will remember, in Salmon Arm, and we have a few others around the province. So for us, understanding that Grand Forks has no permanent shelter or supportive housing, really targeting people who are experiencing homelessness, we really are looking to build permanent purpose-built homes with supports, really as a priority area for both Dana and me. Next slide, please. We want to include this slide because it helps to differentiate shelter versus supportive housing. And of course, in a shelter, Darren will be able to tell you that people are eligible, or that they will get a bed if there is a bed available. It's a shared space kind of dorm style, usually, is the typical model that we have. Shelter guests have access to 3 meals per day. They don't have to pay any contribution to the service that they receive. And, oftentimes there is a worker there that really helps to do their best to connect people to services that may be offsite. Supportive housing, and it's really, shelters are Band-Aid solutions. It's really to get people in at wintertime, for example. It's really as a life-saving measure. It's not intended to be a home for somebody. The fact is that when there isn't enough supportive housing, some shelters become homes for people. And it is better than sleeping outside, but certainly it doesn't provide that stability or a way forward for folks. And so that's why supportive housing is really what we, Dana and I, certainly prioritize in terms of the site selection, and just in terms of what we're intending to do around this vulnerable population. We know that supportive housing really changes lives, and in order for them to experience that change, we actually have to provide them with a home. And so with supportive housing, we have, with all of our supportive housing in the province and in our region, we have an assessment process that guides the applicant process. The rooms are all studio type apartments, 300 or 400 square feet. They're self-contained, which means they have a full bath room and a hot plate and a fridge, a microwave. We also have meal programs in our supportive housing, so that they get an opportunity to have a hot meal, as well as providing those cooking facilities in their room if they choose to do that. Also helps to build their skills around that part of their life. Folks in supportive housing pay rent for their apartments, and it is $375, which matches the maximum shelter rate that many of them receive from income assistance. And of course, we have support services on site. Next slide, please. This next slide sort of goes into more depth into the types of support services that you would expect at a supportive housing site. And as I say, that this is very like all of the other supportive housing sites that we've delivered under the Rapid Response to Homelessness initiative, which started a few years back, and we have sites delivered across the province. And I feel like there was a cohort of people that went to Kelowna from Grand Forks, and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like you did see a couple of John Howard sites in Kelowna. So for some of you, this isn't new, but for those that don't know, again, it's a self-contained private studio home. There's meal services, residents pay rent for their unit, and really it's the connectivity. So when people are living lives without a home, they are in survival mode, and they do not really have an opportunity to work on the things that they need help with. And getting them housed provides them the opportunity to do that. So we've seen a lot of people who work on getting the skills to volunteer. We've seen a lot of people move on to employment. We've seen a lot of people get stabilized in terms of their mental health and substance use issues. We've also seen a lot of people transition out of supportive housing into more independent housing. They don't need that much actually to stabilize and to get back on their feet. So we've actually seen in the last 3 years, we can think of a lot of people where we've actually created quite a flow into, we've moved people into the private market with a rent supplement, for example, because all that remained in terms of their needs was that financial need. It's the poverty that they were still experiencing. Next slide, please. So just to go over who lives in supportive housing, again, it's a local resident over the age of 19 who's at risk of homelessness or experiencing homelessness, and they do need some additional supports to maintain their housing successfully. When I talked a little bit about before about the assessment process, so BC Housing in each of our communities that we have supportive housing, we do a coordinated process with all the stakeholders, and really it's an opportunity for everyone to collaborate to ensure that we understand who is moving in, and we also make sure that the supports that are in place match the person's needs. And so there's an assessment that's done, as well as getting the corroboration of the other stakeholders who might have information about the person that will really lend itself nicely to understanding more fully the person and where they're at in their life, and whether this housing is going to be a fit for them or whether they need something else. So that's the assessment process, and that's the coordinated access process. And then again, the operator has them pay rent, and the normal landlord-tenant relationship continues, where they the tenant signs a program agreement which outlines roles and responsibilities and expectations. And so everyone has a really good understanding of what's required to be successful in that housing. Next slide, please. Part of what we hear when we move into communities is people are generally unsure or feel fear about what this new building will bring, and we hear a lot of narrative about concerns. And so we try and take a very proactive approach around how we integrate these sites into community. And so there are a number of strategies that we use. The first one is selecting an experienced operator who has experience working with this population and also has experience in the community and has relationships that are broad, or else they have an ability to build relationships in community. We also, part of the funding that we are able to provide, which is really great, is that 24/7 staffing model. And so that means that there's 2 staff on at any time, day or night in the building, but there's also extra staff. There's also a manager, there's janitorial, there's food service, and then of course there's other service providers that come in and assist people with whatever it is that they may need. So um, that helps to ensure that the building is stabilized. We also make sure that our operators are outside keeping a good building, just in terms of the building itself, but also the grounds, and then of course the neighborhood. So we have our providers do walkabouts in the neighborhood to ensure that things are cleaned up, even when it's not our own mess. That's part of being someone in community. It's about cleaning up, and it's about making sure that issues are dealt with that need to be addressed. It's about understanding what's happening in your neighborhood, and the operator is a very good one to do that. In addition, what I've also heard, and our experience has told us, that when people get housed, they become very good at understanding what's happening in the neighborhood, and they're often our best security in neighborhoods because they know who does and doesn't belong, and they are also wanting to do all they can to connect in and to show that that they are of some value and they can do something valuable in community. So you'll often see them in our other communities wearing their high vis vests, and they go out and clean up in the neighborhood, and they get to know their neighbors. So that's a really important aspect of what we try and do in communities across our region. Next slide, please. We wanted to include, this is a great example in Kamloops. It's called Sparrow House. It's operated by Ask Wellness, and some of you may be familiar with Bob Hughes. Bob has worked with Darren and has been an actual provider in Grand Forks, providing outreach services as well, and providing some mentorship in and around homelessness related services, and trying to educate as many people as he can. Bob is a great advocate for housing and supports for vulnerable people, and he has a number of buildings in Kamloops and in Merritt and in Penticton. But his quote is interesting, and it's worth reading. He says, "Sparrow House is the place where it starts. The building is not only special because it's the first housing designed for people experiencing homelessness in Kamloops, but also because it's about providing support services so that people's time here is spent being able to get well, figuring out what they want to do, and helping them get some dignity. It's unrealistic for the homeless community to pick up the pieces of their lives on their own without the help of programs and services." And so the picture also tries to show, and I don't know how much you can see, these are small shots, but it shows the outside, and this is front facing on a commercial street in Kamloops, surrounded by commercial neighbors and residential neighborhood towards the back of the site. The second picture is the typical inside of a unit, and it comes furnished like that. And then those are the second two pictures. And then the last picture is a bathroom which is fully accessible. This one appears to be, not all of them are like that, but certainly for people with mobility challenges, we want to make sure that we can provide the proper housing for them as well. Next slide, please. This slide, oh, sorry, Dana, it's a couple before that. Yes, impacts of building supportive housing. And so this is one that is helpful, I think, for communities to understand sort of the dollars and cents around the difference between if you provide supportive housing or if you don't, and the impact that a homeless person has on your existing network of services, and you compare that to that same person who gets housed, and what their impact is to that same community level services. So there were a number of studies done to try and put a number to that exact statement. And so this says that on average, a person experiencing homelessness with addictions and or mental health used $55,000 per year in healthcare and or correction services. That same person in supportive housing had considerably less, so $37,000 per year in healthcare and or correction services. And so, of course, especially as we look at COVID and our concern about our hospital beds being used for people who are sick with COVID, the last thing we want to do is to have, you know, our homeless population also plugging up our systems when they can be adequately housed, and there is a great reduced need for those services. So that's all I wanted to bring up on that slide.
Thank you, Nanette. Sorry, I just had to unmute. So some of the work that we've done and resources that we do have is some toolkits and information on our website regarding and resources to assist in planning towards non-market housing, such as supportive housing in your community. So again, there's other different types of non-market housing. So there's a toolkits for local governments regarding design. We have a lot of design guidelines, etc., on our website. Gaining and maintaining acceptance of supportive housing and non-market housing in communities. There's some sample materials, resources that you can utilize, some property value case studies series, and community benefits of supportive housing, to name a few. So we have a whole research division that works on these projects, and we put together sort of the information because we are delivering non-market housing across the province, almost that entire continuum that Nanette showed you in an earlier slide and went through. I would suggest that we're almost doing everything on the continuum now, which is a rarity. We don't normally have programs that take us from one end of that continuum to the other, typically. See if I can. There we go. And so it's about building understanding, right? It's about taking and building awareness of what supportive housing is and what the benefits to the community are through various campaigns, through social media. How do we get out videos? How do we get out stories? And that did reference. We have been creating some videos for some of the supported housing that we have opened. And it's about the building and opportunities, but it's also about the people and how they have grown and their journeys have benefited from being in supportive housing and the changes in their lives and because they were housed. And they're very moving, as Danette said, and very informative. And then it's about how some of them are back at work, some of them are back connecting to families, but also how the units and the buildings look in community as well. And we use and we do supportive housing in purpose-built modular. We convert motels in some cases. There's sometimes existing housing that's transitioning to support. So there's all kinds of stories out there, as well as support stories on our seniors housing, our family housing, and our shelters and others as well. So there's a lot of pieces there, and it's on our website under community stories if you want to look up sort of those aspects. And so sometimes a story tells a lot more than sort of slide presentations and that. So I encourage you to go take a look at some of the stuff that's on our website there. And so again, oops, there's the contacts for both Nanette and I, our emails, and just open for any questions. I'm just going to leave this for a minute, then I'll stop sharing if you want to get this, or we can provide others have our emails.
Thanks very much, Nanette and Dana. Very informative presentation. I think it was nice to have the visuals and just kind of see the whole thing in context. That said, I'm sure people have questions. So Dana and Nanette are here to take your questions today. So fire away. I'm having a bit of trouble seeing everybody at the same time. So I have to scan through the panel to see. So, you know, I'm completely amenable to, if you have a question, just to verbally ask for attention, and we'll give it to you. That would be easier instead of me looking, constantly scrolling here. I can't get everybody up on the screen at the same time. Oh, there, I just did it.
You clicked on gallery view, right?
Yeah, I found it. Okay, that said, if anyone has a question, put up your hand, please, and we'll be happy to direct you to one of our speakers here today. And Palmer, I see your hand up.
I was wondering if you could tell me what the, I've been making notes as I go along. What training do your supportive staff have?
Yeah, so our agreements are fairly detailed in terms of the kinds of training we want our operators to have their staff. So, you know, trauma-informed practice, they should have mental health first aid, they should have experience in general around mental health and substance use, they should understand harm reduction philosophy, housing first philosophy, nonviolent crisis intervention. They also should understand right now all of the COVID protocols according to public health. That's off the top of my head.
Thank you, Nanette. Any further questions?
If nobody else has got, I got a list.
All right, Anne, go ahead.
So you've got, what happens if they need rehab and detox? Nothing was mentioned about that.
So do you mean
Nanette.
if a supportive housing client they come into housing and it's determined that they need rehab, or?
Yeah. They're looking for rehabilitation and detoxification, and I didn't see, you didn't mention anything in there, so I'm just curious as to how that is addressed, because I didn't see anything in your thing about mental health being involved under the Ministry of Mental Health.
Yeah, well, part of our partnership slide did include interior health, and so we work collaboratively with interior health, especially as it relates to when we have our applicant list and we've determined what some of their needs are. Of course, our tenant support workers or residential workers, whatever the operator calls them, isn't usually in a position to provide those sort of key health related services, if that is detox or if that is rehab related to their treatment protocols. So we really need to work closely with interior health, and as we would move closer in with Grand Forks, we need to get a better understanding of the services that are available in Grand Forks that health can offer, and how we can partner, and what the needs are in community. In Kelowna, for example, when there's that need, you know, we do have services in place so that they can go to detox and then come back to their unit. So it just depends on case by case and what other service providers are able to do to support that person with their needs.
Does that answer your question, Anne?
Not really, because I don't understand why it wouldn't be a complete wraparound where you actually are providing the necessary help to get these people back. And I recognize that in some cases with mental health issues that they're not going to be actually members or contributing members of society because it's just too far gone. But you know, you did say at one point that you are you're assessing, and there's an agreement. So what happens if these people, pardon the terminology, however, your clients are not able to live up to their agreement and they fall by the wayside? What happens? How do you deal with things like this?
Well, it just depends on how egregious the breach of the program agreement is. And so if it involves violence, then the operator has a obligation to ensure that his staff, their staff and the tenants also are safe. And so violence is usually one of those ones where, you know, oftentimes residents can't be maintained. But it's for other things, you know, if someone, to be honest, in supportive housing, it takes a lot to have someone's residents not be supported. The operator goes very far to try and make sure that that tenant is successful in their housing. And short of violence, it is not that usual where we can't seem to find a way to support that person in housing.
Thank you, Nanette. Any other questions?
I'm just checking my list, but go ahead, anybody else?
I'm not seeing a lot of hands up, Anne, so I think you could probably go ahead.
Okay.
Oh,
So I was wondering if you have, sorry.
I've got one from Chris Moslin, and then we'll move back to you.
Yeah, and I think Councillor Thompson is going to chase it up too. Yeah, I guess the question is how can we, the supportive housing, you know, we are in a rural community. We do have, and I have become more familiar with, really good outreach workers, really good social supporters, both within IHA, anchors within community groups. We have a lot. And I would look forward to that supportive housing is going to bring more. That is, I was one of the cadre that did go to Kelowna, and I was impressed by the employees and staff at these supportive housing units. They seemed to be university trained, young people, pretty passionate, dedicated about their work. I guess how much tailor-made can we make this offer? You know, we would, in a small rural community, for example, have been studying the campus of care thing, and one of the major things is how can we partner more with other ministries? BC Housing is taking a big lead and a big chunk here. Would partnering with other ministries more closely, especially in funding, provide better supports? Yeah, sorry, Chair, I barely got that out.
I'll start and then Nanette can tap in. I mean, those are excellent questions. And for sure, the supportive housing is only one aspect of the opportunity and the staffing model we put in there. When we showed the slide on community, it's not just about the creation of it, it is about the operation. And how do those resources, if they're not in community, then get added to community or brought into community because of the needs are being identified, people are being housed and have opportunities. So as people need those opportunities in the supportive housing, we bring the services in, or we bring in other community groups or engage with other community groups who provide those services. The other services, this is not the only resolution, I think, to poverty and homelessness or at risk of homelessness. There are other aspects, and that's why we talked about the larger community plan. I think that goes to your question, Chris, on this is one aspect of what could be a larger community solution in planning, how to create more affordability. So people who have moved through the supportive housing maybe have gone to rehab because now they've identified that they wish to go. How do we set them up with health to get them entrance into rehab or whatever those processes to go where they can sober up and get clean and have those are health resources, not housing resources. And then when they come back, how do we rehouse them appropriately within the supportive housing, or actually provide them housing and other opportunities in the community where they can stay sober and clean if that is their choice. And there are other options. Raven Place is one example of some other affordable housing, but there's other affordable housing in community. And as Nanette mentioned, in the market, we do have rent subsidies as well to help people as they move along in their journey. But it isn't, I think it's a good point, it's not a BC Housing only solution. This is a solution that involves other ministries, other government, other community groups. Our health authority is one, and Anne, I think you mentioned mental health addictions. Our health authorities are huge, right? So they provide, you know, clinical supports, mental health supports, harm reduction supports, addiction recovery supports, complex care needs, hospital stay needs. So when we put them in, we kind of blanketed all of the aspects that health becomes a partner in. And that was just for want of space on the list, but they have a huge list. There's other ministries, you're correct. And then there's also where we have to tap in. Sometimes CLBC has to be involved because of the certain individuals or other ministries that we work with, and your local community social service sector. So those agencies and nonprofits that provide supports in the community are a huge opportunity there. And how do we expand that? So I think Chris, there is more of that made in Grand Forks solution because of your providers. And as Nanette said, the health authority opportunities, but how do we grow them if we do provide the supports, and how do we grow the other housing shortfalls in your community that might be there that are identified besides supportive housing? How do we stop people from ending up homeless? How do we get people the supports they need in their homes before they become homeless as well? So there's a larger piece to the entire picture. And the supportive housing is one of those pieces. And then I'll just let you finish up there.
Sure. What I was just going to mention, in addition to what you've said, Dana, is just that one of the things that Grand Forks is a big advantage is the role of Darren and his group and his operation of the current temporary winter shelter this year and last year. And it gives him tremendous insight into those individuals that are accessing the shelter. And we've also provided Darren with outreach dollars so he understands Darren's group, not Darren specifically. So he understands the needs of the folks sheltering outside who aren't coming into shelter. And with that intel, we get a better understanding of the profile of some of the individuals that may go into supportive housing. It certainly helps us to understand what the needs are and to try and plan for that. We can't do it alone, and in smaller communities it's tougher. I'm not going to candy coat that at all. We do need the support of the other ministries, the Ministry for Social Development, Poverty Reduction, CLBC, as Dana has mentioned. Of course, Interior Health has to play a big role. So we really look to have those all partners at the table. And of course, with coordinated access, those very partners are at the table, and they are there to contribute because we need to understand the person's needs, who's coming in, and how that person can be supported so that their tenancies are successful.
Okay, I see Tammy and then Anne. Tammy?
Hi, my question for BC Housing is, should a supportive housing building be built? How long is it supported by the government in terms of the programs and services and staff? Is that like a 5-year, 10-year, 30-year? I'd like a little insight into that, because the building itself would be here in our city for probably much longer than what you'd support it for.
So I think with the supported housing fund, and if I could go back in other supported housing we've developed over the last 5 or 10 years, we can't make any commitments that, what the future governments will do, obviously. And it's one of the reasons we actually do build independent units, because if it no longer could be supported, or if it no longer required supported, maybe, that people could just live independently in the building. So, but we have seen supportive housing go on for decades. I think Nanette had a slide once that showed the longest running supportive housing in the province is 47 years. And so the variations on funding over the years has definitely changed. I will say that. When we used to build this form of housing, I've been at BC Housing almost 35 years, so I've seen great progression. We used to just be able to fund housing at BC Housing. And then service providers had to go to the respective different ministries to try to get staffing budgets. And what we did about 15 years ago, maybe a bit longer, is we added the support workers that we can fund, not the clinical services, because that's health, but the support workers became part of BC Housing's budget. And it has allowed us to make sure that we are building the housing with the required support structure that needs to be there. So we want to, Nanette and I want to believe we're in this for the long haul, and we've seen historically, we have been the ones that we've been funding, I think, since about 2005 or so. Lots before that where we had to bring the other ministries in, but since we got the double funding, so there's a lot of supportive housing, and that model has evolved over time as well. We are not doing the same model we did then because we have learned and we have grown. We went from not 24/7 to realizing we needed 24/7. We went from shelters that were 12 hours a day, winter only, to realizing we needed 24/7 because, and then we needed staff inside to have outreach to those people that are arriving at the shelters so that they're not having to leave in the morning and just having no opportunity at all to ever seek any assistance. So we evolve our programs over time. I anticipate we're in this for the long haul from the housing perspective at a minimum. The housing we're building would be what we would expect to last 60 years, we would hope, at least from a building perspective. But as a government agency, I can't tell you that we would operate it for 60, but we have been fairly successful year after year to see our budgets continue and added to for the supports. I hope that sort of answers the question, but.
A good question. Thanks for your answer, Dana. I'll take one more question. Okay, two more. I see Anne and then Christine. We do have some new business we have to deal with before we leave today, so I'm trying to be considerate of the time. So let's try and keep it concise. Thank you. Anne, you're up.
Thank you. Can you tell me what the catchment area would be for Grand Forks?
No. Oh, you're muted, Dana. Or
muted. Can't hear you.
I was going to let Nanette answer. Sorry, you couldn't hear me say that.
I was going to do the same. And so I guess it's understanding what I think that's a conversation. You know, when we first when we talk about supportive housing and community, and we think about options that are more rural in nature, and thinking about what you think the city of Grand Forks and its surrounding area encompasses, I think it is a conversation, because I think you know best, and we always say local because we want to make sure that there is a very big understanding that you're not getting people from Vancouver coming up to Grand Forks just to live in supportive housing because you built it. So we want to make sure that they're local, but I think what we all determine as local is really something that we can continue to talk about.
Can I go back on that?
Yeah, you can follow up and go ahead.
Because you kind of segued into my next thing, because, you know, we've been spending a lot of time talking about what we feel the needs are in a rural community and how we could put together a campus of care concept. And so we're looking for those kinds of supports, which aren't just BC Housing, obviously they're mental health as well. And so am I getting from what you guys are saying that you're willing to actually discuss this, how we could put this together, how we could approach other ministries and get them involved, how we could perhaps become a test case for how does this look in a rural scenario?
So it's a great question. Sorry, Nanette, I'll pop in. So the campus model is quite interesting, and I know that Prince George is actually, they're just starting on a campus model with Northern Health being involved. A caution, if I could say that, it took 3.5 years that housing wasn't built, waiting for the campus. So it can be about planning it on a site, but maybe it could still be where it's a building and then a next opportunity and doing that. But if you want to gather all ministries and agencies together to all plan one project that's going to be an entire campus, that would be quite a feat. I'm not saying you can't do it. I've seen more happen in small rural communities than I've seen in larger. But it is, you'd have to start those conversations. And certainly if another ministry came to you and health said, we'd love to put this in the same building, and that we would work with them. We work with other partners. So we would be available to work with them. We wouldn't have a problem if the funding came. We can't pay for health clinics, but we can put them into our projects and share the expenses. But it's whether you want to wait for very different government fiscal budgets and capital planning opportunities. So I'm not going to say you can't do it. I just say sometimes it's prudent to plan it where you can plan it and then plan for the next stage, and do it in phases. If you can't right away get their interest in participating, if you want to see housing happen and deliver those services. So we feel there's an urgency now. We only have a winter shelter. We know we're experiencing homelessness. People need to come out of the cold. But how do we add that? Certainly seeing those supports and other services in the community would be a benefit to the housing that we would build. I hope that helps you. We're willing to work on it, but without the other governments being ready to give their funding, it could be a huge delay to seeing the housing built, unless it is strategized in phases, which we could easily do.
Thank you. That's helpful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dana. I think everybody's encouraged by that answer. Christine had a question. I'm sorry, Christine, I forgot about you.
Oh, that's okay. I forgive you. I just have a sort of a comment and then a question. Because of the way the initial supportive housing was rolled out in Grand Forks, it left a sour taste in everybody's, or a lot of people's mouths, including mine. But I am learning more and more about addictions. I belong to the community action team, which is part of Anchors. And I was encouraged to hear some of the information, and I can't remember if it was Dana or Nanette that brought it out, but does BC Housing ever issue public notices or releases, press releases with respect to their programs? And the reason I'm asking this is, if you were both on earlier, council is going to be preparing a survey, and we want it to be an informed survey for the residents of our community to answer. Would you consider issuing something along those lines to inform the public of what that looks like from BC Housing's perspective, and how it would be operated, and the services that are provided and the like? I saw the ones in Kelowna that the John Howard Society have, and they are really, really something to behold. So I would just like your comments on that, if BC Housing or one of you would consider doing something along those lines prior to our survey going out.
So sorry, Nanette, you can jump in if I'm out of line, but I think we could take that request back to our communications team, which we have a large one of, and connect with the ministry. I could see easily providing maybe links to some of the information that we have regarding supportive housing, because we can't do presentations, but a lot of this information that Nanette and I spoke to, and that was that last one I did, where there's all these links to different resources. What is supportive housing, property values? So how could we present and provide links, at least at a minimum, to that? Do we, is there an ability for us to, when Grand Forks, say the city, is doing a release for the survey, that we would put a quote in from maybe our minister or something? Those requests could happen, and then with the links, I think. But I will defer to our, maybe bringing that to our communications team and seeing if there's a way to do that and participate in that. Is that sort of answering your question?
Well, it does. I just want to, excuse me, allay the concerns and the misconceptions that people have about this.
We agree.
Yeah,
we agree. If
it came from BC Housing, not just links of where to look, but just something that you could put on the radio, the local radio, or put on in the Gazette, the local newspaper. I think that would be extremely, extremely helpful.
Yeah, I'd recommend let's take that offline here, but let's talk to our communications team about how that might look, and if we are able to do that, and what your vision is for that.
Because I
All
think
right.
we,
Sorry, Nadine.
sorry, I was just going to say that being proactive is such a critical it's such a critical thing, and it's a great investment if you can figure out a way to do it. And so to your point, Christine, you know, we have been doing myth busting for many years now, and it is so great when you can share information and you can start having conversations and get to the nub of what the issue is and really understand it and be able to allay the concerns as you have just stated. So we support that 100%. And so if we can just get a real good sense of how you want it to look, we will certainly take it back to our communications.
Thank you, Nanette. My apologies. I keep saying Nadine. Yeah. Anyway, with that said, last chance for a question, and we need to move on. Looks like that's it. So I'd like to thank Danna and Nanette for attending today. You know, education is always key. And you know, the more we know, the more informed we can be with our discussion and ultimately our decisions as we move forward. I think for me, my personal observation was that I'm most encouraged about what I'm seeing as kind of a willingness to share and communicate as we move forward and get closer to the goal of addressing these problems as a community. Community input is obviously one of my priorities, and you know, I think it's in everybody's best interest to have you know, as open a conversation as we can manage moving forward. So I thank you for that. I've benefited from it. I'm sure everybody else has too. We've got some new business that's coming up. Julianne, I'll get to you in a sec. We've got some new business coming up that might interest both Danna and Nanette. And given that, we've got a motion on the table that kind of ties in with what we were talking about earlier. So that said, I'm inviting you to stay for the duration. It probably won't take long. Juliana, you had a question.
Yeah, my apologies. I just wanted to know if the emails for Danna and Nanette could be maybe sent to our group. Apologies for the dogs. If we could see those emails again is what I'm asking. Either email them to the group so we have them, or if you could put them back on screen and quickly write them down.
I will attach them to the minutes, Chair, if you like, or send them out as a group email after the meeting. I can do that.
I've got a hand up from Ann Palmer.
Sorry, just one other thing. Is there any way that you could get us the name of who we could talk to in Prince George that's trying the Campus of Care? It would be interesting to hear their take and how they've progressed and what steps they took on it. That would be really helpful.
Certainly. From the city perspective, or do you want that from the operator, or both?
I think both would be great, actually.
Okay.
It would all help us try and figure out how we're going to do what we're going to do.
I can do that for you, for sure.
Thank you. Awesome.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to move it to new business. At the last meeting, we got cut short, kind of. We had a motion carried whereby the committee gave its blessing to continuing with looking at the Campus of Care model. Given that we left without putting an action plan in place, we had a commitment to keep looking at it and work on it and develop our vision for it. So with that said, Mr. Pratt has brought us a motion today. I'm going to turn it over to Darren, and Darren could speak to his motion, and then hopefully we'll find a seconder and we can have some discussion about it if needed. Darren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the table's aware, my colleague Teresa Taylor and I have been asked to do a briefing note regarding what a Campus of Care model looked like and some historical context. We provided that back in the October meeting. So yeah, I think that if the table has a desire, and I've heard that from Anne and from Tammy and from a few other members of the table, I think that it's time to maybe, if this is a goal of the table, let's put it out for a vote to see if this is something to move forward. So my motion was that a 4-person subcommittee be struck to explore the potential viability and a model of a campus of care for the Boundary region to address ongoing issues of homelessness and mental health. And I want to make this clear, and to tie this back into your question that you asked of Nanette and Dana, we are Boundary Family Services. Our catchment area is Christina Lake to Big White. That is our interior health catchment and our school district catchment. So from my agency's perspective, anything that we engage in is to encompass that catchment area.
Thanks for clarifying that. Darren, further to your motion, I guess I'm looking for a seconder at this point. Everybody's had a chance to consider it. It was mailed out in advance. So I would think that people had a chance to consider the motion in advance of the meeting. Therefore, if somebody would feel so inclined, I'd appreciate a seconder on it and we can move forward. Ann Palmer as a seconder then. So we've got a motion, folks. There's a motion on the table. Given that discussion, Tammy.
I just want to thank the presenters and clarification, Darren. So the motion on the table would be in place of the supportive housing, or as well as the supportive housing, or just looking into what this model would look like.
Tammy, I think that Dana made it very clear that this is not going to be a turnkey solution. So this would be in parallel to ongoing discussions. You know, the fight that we've seen as a table has been, and Anna's pointed this out, as is John, every fall we're scrambling coming out of summer trying to find a shelter. You know, we're in shelter operations right now, but we're still continuing discussions around how do we continue something, you know, for next year so we're not caught in the same position. So this would be a parallel. This does not suspend discussions around housing. Maybe this becomes a discussion of what is the longitudinal development of supported housing morphing into a campus of care. But that's for this 4-person committee to unpack and look at pros and cons and what the risk and rewards are of that model.
Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Darren. Anyone else? Okay, what I'd like to do is just instruct the committee that we've got a motion on the table, and I think we're ready to call the question if there's no more discussion or debate. However, I think it serves us to, before we leave today, define who's going to be on the committee so that that work can actually progress forward. The way the motion is worded, it's not specific to the membership of the committee, but just that there will be a subcommittee tasked with further articulating the whole campus of care idea. So with that, I think Darren's told us all we need to know. I'll call the question. Anyone opposed? Okay, I'm seeing no opposition. Abstainers? No abstaining votes. That motion will be carried. Thank you. So we have a subcommittee or a commitment to form a subcommittee. We need to iron out the membership. We can do this 2 ways. We can have people step forward and volunteer. Darren's asking for 4 people, but I'm going to, before we begin that, I'm going to ask Darren to speak to what he feels his ideal subcommittee looks like, because I'm seeing an overlap of ministry involvement here. So, you know, my mind goes to thinking that there might be representation from a pretty diverse group here on the committee. Given that, sometimes, you know, it's tough to find volunteers. So we, you know, take anybody that steps forward. But I'm hoping that we think about what would be best as we move forward. This is going to be a fairly onerous job, I think. Given that, Darren, what's your vision for an ideal committee here?
Nothing in life is ideal, Mr. Chair. I think that just a good representative cross-section of the table, I think, with some balance and critical thought. You know, I like people who kind of look things 90 degrees to the side. I like people who kind of think things out of the box, because we are going to be challenged by existing ministries as to why they should shift the way they do business. So if we go to them with the traditional hat in hand answers of why we think this is a good idea, it's not going to fly. So we have to come up with a non-traditional solution based on non-traditional questions. So I think I'd like everybody at the table to reach down and do some soul searching, and what do you bring to the table, to this subcommittee, and what do you really want to get out of it, and what do you want the subcommittee to generate for the table in the community?
I'd like to ask you another question, Darren. In your way of prioritizing, what level of urgency do you give the outcome here? Do you want to see something on the table quicker, or how long are you envisioning this to take?
Well, I think the subcommittee needs to break it down into what are realistic steps. You know, I think that Anne made a valid point. If we have subject matter experts in Prince George who can kind of show us a pathway and show us what their plan was, that committee can then sit down and go, okay, if it took Prince George 3.5 years based on these models, knowing the things that have already been done, they can give us a realistic timeline. I think for us to put we want a report by May 1st. Prince George may not have had an operational plan for 30 months. So that's really unfair to the committee. So I would like to see the committee tasked with the first steps, as Anne pointed out, reaching out to Prince George, the operator, as well as the government up there, the city or the municipality, to then begin those discussions, have them tell us as subject matter experts what's realistic.
Okay, I think the reason I asked that, Darren, was that I'm trying to get a sense of whether we need to put members in place at the moment, or whether we want to give people a chance to think about what they might have to contribute. You look like you have an answer, Darren.
I think that if we throw it to the table now, if nobody is feeling comfortable answering, then we acquiesce to the next meeting. But if we have some people willing to step into the breach right now, let's get them before they change their minds.
Okay, thank you. Tammy?
It's my thought that it might be, because of the importance of this committee, it might be a good idea to have anyone who is interested to apply with a little bit of a bio as to why, what they bring to the table. And I also think that it's really important that we have representation that matches the people we would be serving. So for example, there is a high number of Indigenous people living on the streets. We need to have somebody on that committee who represents the Indigenous community.
Okay, well, what we have, Tammy, on the table is presently we've carried a motion to strike a 4-person subcommittee. So given that, what I'm hearing from the mover is that he would like to see that committee formed today if we have people that are willing. What I will do is ask for an informal show of hands at this point of people that might be interested in serving on this committee. Ann Palmer, I'll put my hand up. I would be interested in it. Anyone else? That's it?
I'm interested. Teresa speaking.
Oh, hi, Teresa. Okay, sorry, you're in the background there in black, but I see your name. Okay, thank you. That's Teresa, Anne, John.
Tammy here. I'm willing to assist, but I'm not confident on my skill set for this committee. So I'll leave that to Darren to decide, and there will be no hard feelings if I'm not the person you need.
Mr. Chair, if I may address that?
Yes.
Oh, Tammy, I'm in no position to make those decisions. I just moved this forward. I'm not choosing the committee. I just made a motion that, you know, if we're in for a penny, in for a pound, and there's a desire to explore this, let's get after it. That's the scope of my involvement.
part of me wishes that Bev or somebody from IH was here. I think it would be awesome to have somebody from Interior Health connected to this. But, you know, I do agree with Darren. I think it serves us well to just get this thing rolling. I think the initial steps are kind of educational in a sense, like responding to Anne's request for information regarding the program and Kamloops and so on. I don't see a problem with moving forward. Technically, procedurally, we can do this two ways. We can seek approval from the committee for the structure of the committee, or we can just go ahead and have have Darren actually give us his blessing with what he's seen so far, and we can just strike it. Either way, I don't know that we need to get so formal as to put a motion on the table with this. We've already agreed to the committee. Yes, Anne?
So I agree with you, Jan. I'd like to see somebody from Interior Health if possible. I'm wondering if it's too early to be looking at reaching out to Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions. And I'm sure Darren can address that. When all that Dana and Nanette were saying makes me wonder if we should also be, or if this would be separate from it, that if the first steps are something in support of housing, that perhaps the Hardyview building might be looked at now to be morphing into something the way we see down the road. I don't know if you can address that, Darren, or
You know, Anne, at this point, we're just getting through shelter ops. I don't have any comment at all on Hardyview moving ahead. That is a discussion perhaps Dana and Nanette and I can have, but at this point, we're just trying to get through shelter season.
And I want to caution the larger table here that I think, you know, really the rationale behind striking a subcommittee is to start dealing with those issues and questions in that environment, and to kind of remove it from the larger table, because there, you know, there's just so many variables and things to figure out as we move forward that it becomes impractical to, you know, have this thing just sitting here for discussion all the time as we move forward. This is a far more streamlined approach, I think, and serves the purpose of lending some definition to all this in as short a time as possible. And I'm being overly optimistic when I say short a time as possible, but we'll run with that. So I believe we have, I have 4 volunteers marked down. I see Christine has got her hand up. So Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just encourage the committee. I think your choices are really good, and I thank the people that volunteered to serve on this. But I'm going to assume that you are going to be consulting with Coins and some of the other organizations represented at the table for their input, particularly Coins because of the numbers of Aboriginal in homeless. So that's just my thoughts. Thank you.
That was expressed earlier as well by one of the, oh no, I think it was our new representative from Coins. Sorry, I think it's Jen, if I've got the name correct. Okay, so, well, all right, I've got Teresa Taylor, Tammy, Ann Palmer, John, and possibly Indigenous representation, which, you know, there's nothing that says that like we can't call on these people as we move forward as well. And, you know, where we, you know, start to look at more detail, you know, we call on Coins and, you know, obviously we'll have to have discussions with IH and mental health and so on. So, you know, I have a feeling this thing will take its own form, but we just need to get the ball rolling here. So, Mr. Pratt, I'm going to put it in your court. We've got, again, Teresa, Tammy, Ann, John, that have volunteered so far. Can you work with these people?
Again, this is not my committee, Mr. Chair. This is, I think the one question, and this is not to slight my esteemed colleagues at C4, but I'm wondering if perhaps 2 members of C4 versus perhaps 1 more subject matter expert might be a little more prudent.
Mr. Pratt, I'm inclined to agree with you. I actually twigged onto that as I was writing the names down here. I think that, you know, we've according to our terms of reference, we've had organizations represented at the table with 1 or more delegates at the table. But your point is well taken. I think that if we had as broad a representation as possible, that would be good. Should we?
I'm wondering, Mr. Chair, if maybe we can just defer that final slot till perhaps Bev gets back in the new year to see if there's an opportunity for interior health representation.
Okay, all right.
That would be my preference too.
So then I've got Teresa, Tammy, John or Ann, and possibly someone from Mental Health IH. Given that, I'm happy to work on it. And you want to arm wrestle over it? What do you want to do?
No, you know, you and I both looked at the same sorts of things with the group down in Texas, and I know you've actually had more communication with them than I have. So I think you've got a better handle on it and would probably fulfill the slot better. Does the same thing apply then to BIFAS, that they only need 1?
Boundary family only has 1. I'm not on this committee.
You're not?
No, I'm not on this committee. I made the motion to form. My name hasn't been put forward as a member. Did you see my hand go up? I'm not on this committee.
Okay, so we've got, thanks for straightening that out. I was under the impression that you would be on the committee, but that, you know, we've got Teresa here that has volunteered. You know, personally, again, I would suggest that whatever the operator would like here is amenable to me, because they have to run the place. And also I look at our FIS representatives as being the local experts on the topic. So given that, I'm content with whatever FIS would like to do with this. So I'm seeing then Teresa, Tammy, John, and possibly Bev or somebody that we could call up on later. Okay, we do need ratification from the committee on this. So, you know, technically we could have put a motion forward here, but I don't think we need to. We've got a subcommittee. We've got that motion carried. If we have acceptance by the movers of the motion that this will work, then we're a go here. Everybody's okay? All right, looks good. I think we can call it a day. I need to pull up my agenda here. Just give me a sec. All right, that's not it.
Chair, I hesitate to try, but I'll share my screen again. But
oh, it's okay. I've got it, Chris.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I've got it. All right. So we've got the motion carried from Boundary Family Services. Late items we've already dealt with. Next steps, anyone? Anything to consider? Tammy?
When would the committee set a meeting? Would that be done by email afterwards or now?
Good point. Teresa, you're representing FIS. I'm assuming FIS is kind of spearheading this.
What was the question, Tammy?
Go ahead, Tammy.
Just wondering when we should set a meeting. Should we do that by email after this meeting? Or?
Sure. You know what? How about I send out an email so we have an info stream happening for us.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. You bet.
Thanks, Teresa. Okay, so we're at that place where if there's any last minute items, I guess we've got a couple minutes. We started at 1:20. No late items. Next meeting, January. Let me look at my calendar here. Mr. Moslin, you might work with me on this.
Sorry, Chair. Yeah, I selected January 20th because that was the a Wednesday in January.
Attaboy.
Followed a pattern.
You know, that's what I would have done. So, everybody okay with January 20th?
Well, wait. Oh, having said that, Chair, let's see if I can make sure. Yeah, January 20th is the third Wednesday.
Yep.
So, and I will definitely make sure the city doesn't drop the ball again on the meeting. Whew.
It all worked out.
Yeah,
Had me a little bit rattled. You know, I couldn't find buttons and stuff, but we're all good. And I thank you, Chris. You've got 3 jobs to do all the time, and I have to thank you as well for being so diligent about getting us minutes and agendas and communicating with us so religiously and on schedule and everything else. Good. Thank you. With that said, we have a meeting date for January the 20th, Wednesday, 1:15 via Zoom. And so we need somebody to move that the meeting be adjourned, please. I see Tammy has got her thumb up still, so I will take that as a move that the meeting be adjourned. Seconder on that. There we go. Allie Dixon. The meeting's adjourned, and I just want to wish everybody the best of the season and happy Christmas and all that. And I hope you have a good one.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Ken.
John.
You're on a great meeting.
Okay, well, thank you.
Take care,
Very
everyone.
good. And thank you to Dana and Nanette. That was very nice. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, you're
Thank you
welcome.
for having us.
Anytime.
Thanks,
Bye
everyone.
for now.
Bye.
Bye.